Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's been a while since I've put one of these out, and I sincerely believe that my last video on the subject was sufficient. However, David Wood, in his latest response to me, mentioned a few things that made me feel compelled to put out a response. By the way, for those of you that are just arriving to this discussion, the initial video that led to this video was a video by David and Al-Fadi, which I responded to almost a year ago. Samuel put out a response to that a couple of months later. I put out another response to that 4 months ago. Then a couple of weeks ago, David decides to do a live stream response, which is around 2 hours long. In this video, I'm going to be responding to some of the main points that are made. I'm not going to be responding to every single thing because I do feel that some of the responses that were made were not adequate. If you really want to know my response to every little thing, then just check out my previous videos on the subject. Also, feel free to watch the 2-hour live stream if you are interested in a lot of repetition, or if you want to check out some dance moves, or if you want to check out David pretending to do impressions of me.
According to the Quran. Hey, their claim is simple. Namely, they just quote a ton of Quran verses saying that Muhammad couldn't perform miracles.
Yeah, that's supposed to be me, by the way. Let me show you how it's done. A few years later, I figured out that pets actually control the planet. Whenever a cat or dog would look me in the eye, I would think that it's communicating with me. Fire intro. So here's a quick summary for what I've argued so far. The Quran speaks of miracles in 3 different ways. For example, you have 637, they ask, why has no other sign been sent down to him from his Lord? Say, O Prophet, Allah certainly has the power to send down a sign, though most of them do not know. This was a chapter that was revealed in Mecca, and it was revealed before any miracles were shown. There are a number of verses in the Quran that have a similar message. Every one of them is revealed in Mecca. We also find this verse foreshadowing a miracle being shown. We will soon show them our signs in the horizons and in themselves until it is evident to them that it is the truth. And does it not suffice as to your Lord that he is the ever-present witness over everything? 41:53. Of course, naturally, I argue that our signs in the horizons refers to the splitting of the moon that will occur later. That, of course, also occurs in the Meccan period. Anyhow, years later in Medina, we find this verse. Those who have no knowledge say, if only Allah would speak to us, or a sign would come to us. The same was said by those who came before them. Their hearts are all alike. Indeed, we have made the signs clear for people of sure faith. 2118. Surah Al-Baqarah is the earliest chapter that's revealed in Medina, and of course, as we can see here, it pretty much confirms that a sign was shown to the kuffar, to the polytheists. Also, notice how the answer changes in the Quran. Initially, we have verses that say things like, Allah has the power to reveal signs, and that's in the Meccan period, and the Medinan period, Allah has already shown signs. To counter what I've presented, Samuel presents a chronology that conflicts with what I'm saying. This was my response, followed by David's response to mine.
Now remember what Farad said. He said that the verses that say Muhammad gave no sign come before he did give a sign. Yet what we've just seen here is that these verses all come after Surah 54 and the splitting of the moon.
Samuel's source is a website. Samuel, a random Islamic website, isn't binding evidence on any Muslim. Upon closer inspection, it turns out that they are relying on a tertiary source. El-Zinjani's list is based on Ibn Nadim, an unreliable source. So this claim about the timing of revelations and this list that Samuel provides is unreliable. So let's carry on.
Notice how he just brushed he brushed all that aside.
Yeah.
Hang on. Let's go to the list here that
Fly me
pointed out.
to the moon before
Fly me
Muhammad
to the
speaks in
moon.
hell. Yeah, okay.
All right, ready?
Yep.
revelation order. The chronological order of surahs, i.e. the order in which Quran surahs are revealed to the Holy Prophet, is specified in several reliable sources, most of which are based on the narrations received from the great prophet's companion Ibn Abbas. So they put together a list based on Ibn Abbas, a companion of Muhammad and the father of Quranic studies. The traditional order of revelation is provided in the table below. Notice it's the traditional order of revelation. The detailed information is extracted from the history of the Quran, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't look like Farid is just gonna back down. He's just gonna keep saying it over and over again for his fans. And they're just gonna keep going, wow, Farid's got a point. No, it doesn't matter what chronology Ibn Abbas came up with. We can just deny it and say, and put it in whatever order we want, because that's how the Quran works. Great.
Absolutely careless, sloppy work by David once again. Shouldn't be a surprise. Notice the attitude, notice the confidence. Apparently, I'm rejecting Ibn Abbas. Well, let's see what Ibn Abbas has to say. According to the source these guys provided, Ibn Abbas is saying, in Mecca, 85 chapters were revealed. In Medina, 28 chapters were revealed. Then he lists out the order of the Medinan chapters. He doesn't speak about the Meccan chapters. Guys, if you're gonna do a 2-hour live stream attempting to respond to everything I say, then the least that you can do is attempt to look up the sources that you're quoting against me. I mean, this is embarrassing.
Hey, man, you're just embarrassing us
Oh, sorry.
with your lack of professionalism.
Oh, sorry.
I don't. It's so dumb. His view is that these verses were before. Oh man! All right, we'll get into this in a few minutes, ladies.
There were no miracles that have been revealed, then that probably means that there weren't any miracles that were revealed yet. In all the examples that David quotes, he brings Meccan chapters. Of course,
Yeah.
Not quite. I also quoted Surah 13, and that is a Medinan chapter. That is the dominant position. Oh, of course, you can make an argument for certain chapters either way, and there have been people, but the standard position there is Surah 13 is Medina.
Not quite. Ibn Hayyan confirms that the majority are upon the position that this is a Meccan verse. Carrying on, we have a new attempt to respond to 2118, which explicitly says that the signs were shown to the people.
I looked at the tafsirs of chapter 2, verse 118, and I looked at Ibn Kathir. I kind of glossed over it. I glossed over Tabari. None of those, they don't mention anything about Muhammad performing miracles. On the contrary, Ibn Kathir explicitly mentions that, and we have made the reasoning clear, proving the truth of the messenger, and there is no more need for further questions or proofs for those who believe. So, but for those whose hearts are sealed, they will deny it anyway. So Ibn Kathir clearly interprets this verse as not promising a miracle or anything like that, but as saying the Quran is already clear as it is. There is no need to further convince you. So Farid is apparently on another level. He completely knocks it out of the park. He could completely beat these people up and be the newly renowned scholar to whom everybody should have listened for 1,400 years. Forget about Ibn Kathir. Forget about all of these interpreters. They are losers.
Mm-hmm.
Wild stuff.
Firstly, Ibn Kathir's statement doesn't negate what I've provided, and nowhere does he say that the signs here is referring to the Quran. I don't know what you're going on about. Al-Zajjaj claims that this verse is referring to signs like the splitting of the moon. Ibn Abi Zamanin says the exact same thing. Ibn Hayyan comments that asking for signs after clear signs have been shown is due to stubbornness and arrogance. He then provides the splitting of the moon as an example. So yes, what I've been saying not only fits in with the apparent meaning of the Quran, but it is supported by classical Islamic scholarship. As I've mentioned before in my previous video, Jesus himself was approached by the Pharisees, and when they asked him for a sign, He did not say, well, I've already showed you a sign. That's what David is requesting from the Quran. And again, the Quran does say something like that. However, it's never good enough when it's something from the Quran, and anything is sufficient when it's something in the Bible.
Okay, so this is Fareed turning the tables on my video with Al-Fadi. And, well, this is going to be fun. And
I trust that will go very well.
I trust that this guy is about to be massively deceptive according to his own standard, not according to mine, according to his own.
Wonderful verse in the Gospel of Mark that says pretty much the exact same thing. The Pharisees came and began to question Jesus. To test him, they asked him for a sign from heaven. He sighed deeply and said, "Why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly I tell you, no sign will be given to it."
But let's just go to the chapter that our buddy Fareed himself quoted here. Here we have it. Here's Mark 8. Look, that's what he quoted right there. So verses 11 to 12. The Pharisees came and began to question Jesus. To test him, they asked him for a sign from heaven. He sighed deeply and said, "Why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly I tell you, no sign will be given to it." Then he left them, got back into the boat, and crossed the other side. Let's go ahead and look just a little. Let's see what Fareed deceptively left out. What do you have here? Jesus feeds the 4,000. And what do you have later in the chapter? Jesus heals a blind man at Bethsaida.
Stop right there, criminal scum.
Notice this doesn't even make sense. If it's saying you just witnessed miracles from Muhammad, why would they be demanding miracles from Muhammad?
Gosh.
Well, thank you, David, for providing the full context of Mark, but I'm afraid that the Pharisees didn't have a copy of the Gospel of Mark in order for them to realize that Jesus just performed a miracle. Oh, and by the way, the feeding of the 4,000, well, that happened in a different region. Let's assume that the Pharisees were actually there, even though we have no proof for that, but let's just assume that and give that to them. Either way, Jesus is saying to them that this generation shall not receive a sign. In other words, even though he's making a statement like that, it does not negate the fact that he did perform miracles. And keep in mind that this is a much stronger negation than anything that we find in the Quran. Imagine a group of people appearing in front of Muhammad, peace be upon him, and Jesus, peace be upon him. They ask them both for a sign. Muhammad, peace be upon him, says, "Allah certainly has the power to send down a sign." Jesus, peace be upon him, says, "Why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly, I tell you, no sign will be given to it." Now, if any Christian is going to claim that the statement of Jesus is not a negation of him bringing signs, then the same must be allowed for Muhammad, peace be upon them both. Towards the end of the video, I posed a question to Samuel, asking him about his criteria for an authentic historical report. I was pleasantly surprised to find David attempting to answer this question.
So at the end there, he says, "What are your criteria for a reliable historical report, reporting a miracle?" And different people are going to give different perspectives. AP, for instance, will probably say, I don't care what the historical report says. I'm not going to believe it. I'm not going to believe that a miracle happened. So really weird case here. But if you're asking what sort of sources would you want to take seriously, at least, generally the general rules are the earlier the better. The earlier the better. So when you're talking about the Gospels, you're talking about sources within the lifetimes of Jesus' followers. So check on earliness. So early, that helps. Having multiple sources. Notice if you just had one person saying it, that would be one thing. If you have multiple witnesses claiming that something occurred, that's better. 3, if they're independent.
So David, I appreciate that you took a shot at that, but clearly you haven't really thought of this before. So we have 3 things. We got the earlier the better, multiple, and independent. So let's go through these. Well, firstly, just because a report is earlier doesn't mean that it's authentic, because, I mean, let's say you have 2 sources, a 5th century source and a 3rd century source. Well, apparently the earlier the better. That doesn't mean that the 3rd century source is authentic. You're still disconnected by 3 centuries. In any case, that's not even a condition. Yes, it's something that you prefer. Yes, having an earlier source is better, but just because a source is earlier doesn't mean that it's authentic. In terms of the report being in multiple sources, well, is that a condition as well? Because, I mean, what if two sources are quoting the same source? What if the second source is quoting the first source? Just because you have multiple sources doesn't mean that the information is authentic. And I don't even think David believes in this because of what he says next.
3, if they're independent. In other words, you have Matthew and Luke are both familiar with the Gospel of Mark, apparently. So anything that Matthew and Luke are saying that also come from Mark, you can't treat that as independent. It's not separate. It's not separate. In other words, it sounds like it's all one source. But Matthew and Luke both give miracles that are not in Mark. So that's independent. So some of the miracle stories in Matthew and Luke are independent. And then in John, you also have independent miracles. So you have in each of the Gospels, you have miracles that are not included in the other Gospels.
Right. So as you can see, multiple sources aren't necessary in order to affirm that a miracle happened or in order to affirm that a historical event occurred. So you should have an objective criteria. This should be evidence that's binding upon all the world. It should not be something that's tied to faith. In any case, let's put this stuff to the test. Here I got Tarikh Nabil al-Zarandi, who passes away in the year 1892. He was a Baha'i historian, and he wrote about the life of the Bab. The Bab, by the way, passed away in the year 1850. So Al-Nabil used to report that Al-Bab had the ability to teleport and teleported out of his own imprisonment. Do you believe this, David? Because it's a contemporaneous source, and remember, the earlier the better. So I'll catch you next time, kids, and David, do think about this one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
A few years later, I figured out that pets actually controlled the planet. Whenever a cat or a dog would look me in the eyes, I would think that it was communicating with me.